friends. So today is September 2nd of 2020 and I wanted to go ahead and sit down and film my August wrap-up for this month. Also, I'm going to be combining my wrap-up for last month and my TBR for this upcoming month, September. So yeah, if you guys would like to see what I ended up reading this month, then just keep on watching. Just to give you guys a little heads up, I am going to be switching up the way that I'm doing wrap-ups this upcoming month just to test something a little bit new out. I was inspired by another YouTuber that I can't remember the name of right now, but they basically do a weekly wrap-up instead of a monthly wrap-up. Sometimes I feel a monthly wrap-up, and you'll probably see this reflected in my kind of like reviews of these books. I definitely cannot remember things as clearly as like right after I read them, obviously. I figured it would be easier on me and a lot more content for you guys if I decided to go ahead and do weekly wrap-ups instead of monthly wrap-ups. As far as my TBR, I still am going to be making a monthly TBR just because I feel like I want to have a set specific list of books that I can like pick and choose from. I am definitely going to read books that aren't on that list, and I'm definitely not expecting myself to read all of the books that are on that list. It is going to be a little bit easier for me as well because I read all of the books on my tablet from the Libby app that's connected to my library. So a lot of times there are books that become available before I think they're going to. And so that kind of like throws a monkey wrench. Is that the word? Is that the term? I don't know. It kind of throws in some unpredictability when I have a set TBR and then another book becomes available and then I'm like, I don't know which one to read. So yeah, that happened a couple times this month, and I tried to push my way through and read some of the books that I had on my TBR instead of reading those other books, and I was just like, I probably would have been happier if I just read that book. And I think it's going to help doing weekly wrap-ups instead of monthly wrap-ups because then I can, update you guys on books more frequently. So, like I said, I did end up reading 5 books this month. So the first book that I read was The Silence of Bones. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Basically, this is about a girl who is essentially an indentured servant, and she is working with the military in Korea in the 1800s, or not the military, the police force in Korea in the 1800s. And essentially, the men aren't allowed to touch women's bodies. So whenever there is a murder or an investigation or something like that, they have to have these indentured servants be there to talk to the women and also, dispose of their bodies. So that is basically what is going on in this story, and it's told from this perspective of the indentured servant. And it's really interesting because I never knew about this situation that was happening in Korea. I'm not very well versed on history, but that's why I love reading books, because it gives me a lot of knowledge on things that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. As far as like the story in general, I really, really enjoyed it. I was a little bit nervous about it because when I heard someone talk about it, it was more so in the category of like a psychological thriller mystery type of thing. I would put it more in definitely like a mystery, a heavy mystery type of story. And I really like mysteries. I remember specifically there was this one mystery that I read when I was younger. It was like my first adult book that I read, and I really, really enjoyed it, which is kind of out of character for me because usually I like, YA fantasy, contemporary stories. But I also really like this, and that's what I love about reading variety and stepping out of my comfort zone, is that it opens me up to things that I wouldn't have normally read otherwise. And it also makes me want to like watch different things that I normally wouldn't have watched otherwise, which I also watched Parasite this month, and that was very interesting. It wasn't what I was expecting whatsoever. I wasn't as crazy about it as I thought that I was going to be. I felt like there was a lot of hype, and I had very high expectations for it, and I was just a little bit underwhelmed by the story. Anyway, this is not a movie wrap-up. This is a book wrap-up. I'm rambling. I also had matcha, so that's why I'm like crazy right now. So I felt like there was a lot packed into not a very long story, and I really liked that because there was a lot of character development. There was a lot of historical elements that were involved, not only in the character's personal story, but also in just the time in general. And I felt like the author painted a beautiful picture in my head of what was going on during that time, what the character was feeling, what she was experiencing, and it just really made me extremely happy. I think I said this before, but I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I really, really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the element of it was kind of like a mystery inside of a mystery. The next book is Such a Fun Age, and this book I was inspired to read after attempting the Reading Rush Readathon. That was the book that was supposed to be the group read for the readathon, and it just piqued my interest. And so I decided to go ahead and check it out. Basically, this is from the perspective of an African-American young 20s gal, and she is living in the city, and she is working as a nanny she's working as a babysitter for a very wealthy white family. And this really hit home for me. It hit home because I worked as a nanny for many a wealthy white family growing up, and to the point where now I'm like, I don't want to take care of anybody else's babies except my own, unless I'm like close with someone and I'm like, okay, I'll watch your kid. She was single and kind of like figuring out where she was going in her life, which I definitely relate to, because I think this is just something that happens in this time of our lives. We're just kind of like figuring shit out. I feel like we're doing that throughout our entire lives, to be perfectly honest. So basically, it starts out with her being accused of kidnapping the little girl that she is babysitting by a police officer. And it basically goes from there. It is not the story that I was expecting, because that first chapter was extremely triggering, and I was worried that it was going to continue being that way from that point, which is fine. I just would have had to approach it a little bit differently than if it wasn't the way that it was, if that makes sense. It would have just been a little bit heavier to process those emotions within myself and not just be able to read, about it, because I could see myself in her. You know what I'm saying? I took a pause after I read the first chapter and actually read a couple like non-spoiler reviews on Goodreads, and I was pleasantly surprised that the tone was going to kind of shift in the story. So I decided to continue on, and basically the story switches back and forth between her perspective and also the perspective of the mother of the little girl that she is a babysitter for. It deals with a lot of different elements, like I said, dealing with being a 20-something and figuring out what you want to do with your life, feeling the guilt and the envy of, seeing other people who do know what they want to do with their lives, or at least maybe they're pretending they know what they want to do with their lives. And, seeing people passing you by, essentially, and not really having a direction and kind of figuring that out and what that feels. Then also from the perspective of the white mother and her experience of, dealing with the aftermath of employing someone who went through an experience like this, especially in our current climate, really getting into white guilt, and what that really means. I wasn't a fan of the main character for a couple reasons, but the main reason was because of a certain relationship choice. And I don't know if this is a spoiler. This might be a spoiler, so maybe I'll put a timestamp or something to let you guys know when you can fast forward ahead to if you don't want to hear this. But there is a man that she is involved with who says something very offensive, and I am not the type of person who would excuse something like that. Now, I can understand to a certain extent why she did, but I also kind of feel like that was didn't represent her personality very well. I felt like that wasn't necessarily something she would do. I don't know, it felt weird, and I didn't like it, and I didn't like him, and I was just done with him from that point. It was interesting to see the dynamic of the main character and the white mother. And it was kind of a reflection of how our perspectives really are not necessarily what reality is most of the time. And I feel this 100% of the time whenever I'm watching like Gossip Girl or like Pretty Little Liars or something like that. I'm always just like, if we were just upfront and honest and straight up, and we didn't have to like sugarcoat things or like act like something we weren't, then a lot of problems wouldn't exist. A lot of miscommunication wouldn't exist. And obviously there's societal things that are, you know, are reasons behind why we make certain decisions, why we may, you know, code switch, why we may, you know, not necessarily be all of ourselves in every situation in a way of protecting ourselves. And I 100% understand that, and I do it. And I also can empathize with both sides of, you know, the situation. I do want to say though that I did not like the end. I was not crazy about it, and there were certain things that were handled in certain ways that I was not crazy about. Obviously someone did something that they shouldn't have done, but I could understand why they did it. I don't know. It's so hard. But yes, that's my opinion on that book. That was very long. I'm sorry. Going to be Children of Virtue and Vengeance. This is the second book in the, what is it called? I don't know what the series is called exactly, but the first book is Children of Blood and Bone. Absolutely loved that book. Absolutely loved the second book as well. I heard a lot of mixed reviews on the second book, which tends to happen. And when I read it, I realized why there were so many mixed reviews. The biggest problem that I did have was that someone that I thought they'd gotten rid of in the first book came back in the second book, and I was like, shit, man, that was really just like the only thing that I didn't like about the book. I loved the story. I just love the way this book feels to me. It feels like home, honestly, and it always gives me that feeling of like really wanting to connect with my ancestors. Fun fact, I actually did just purchase a like ancestry DNA kit, so I'm thinking about making a YouTube video sharing my results once I get that. And I think something that people need to understand as well is that there's a lot of historical accuracy when it comes to the like magic system and the deities in this story. It's a part of African spirituality. Very interesting, and I think that's something that people need to understand, is that it's not just like a completely fictional thing. It's also based off of things that are very real. The story itself, I really enjoyed. It was a wild ride, as the first one was, and I was honestly a little bit concerned because I wasn't sure whether it would be able to hold up to the second one. But essentially it is the aftermath and the fallout from the ending of the first book. I don't want to say exactly what happens because I feel like that'll be a spoiler. There's one specific section where the Magi and the diviners, the people with magic who were oppressed for such a long time, they are living in this place and basically thriving so much, and it made me so happy inside, and it made me want to live there so bad. And also it again solidified that feeling of like, I need to know where I come from. 2 books left, and these, well, honestly, I read so many good books this month, but I feel like these 2 books were definitely the highlights of this month. You're wondering why I'm looking over here, my phone is right there. But the first one is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I've been hearing so many people talk about this book, and I think I said this. So I said this in my last video, but I honestly wasn't like excited about reading this book, to be perfectly honest. I heard one booktuber talk about it in a way that made it sound really, really interesting and really appealing. Kind of gave me like, obviously old Hollywood, Judy Garland vibes a little bit. I used to be obsessed with Judy Garland when I was younger for some strange reason. Yeah, it definitely gave me those vibes as I was reading it, and a lot more. So this is from the perspective of not only Evelyn Hugo, but basically it is about, there's a woman who is a journalist. She is half Black, and she has been asked to basically interview Evelyn Hugo. And Evelyn Hugo is not the type of person that does a lot of interviews, and so it's an honor and a surprise that she has been asked to do so, specifically like she was asked for. And there's a lot that goes into that whole situation, but I loved that you were able to learn about the journalist. Is she a journalist, a writer? There were definitely some parallels with her experience and Evelyn Hugo's experience, but obviously the like flesh of the story, ew, that sounded gross. The like flesh of the story was about Evelyn Hugo and her story. So many layers: tragic, beautiful, terrible, sad, happy, magical, wonderful. It was a lot of different things. It brought me through a lot of different feelings. It wasn't what I was expecting at all, by any means. Like, not even close to what I was expecting at all. Like, there were definitely certain things that I was like, okay, this makes sense, you know, based on the time and what I believe the story is, because, you know, she's an old Hollywood actress and stuff like that, and all of her experiences and all that. But the things that went on, especially later on, I was a little bit shook. And it felt like it was the story of a real person. And I cried at a lot of different parts. Was not expecting that. But it was such a good story. It kept me on the edge of my seat, which I wasn't expecting for this story to do. And it was just so unexpected. I was trying to figure out what the plot twist was going to be, because I knew there was going to be a plot twist. But I didn't expect that exactly. Like, out of all the scenarios that I had come up with in my head, that was not one of them. So I applaud the author with being able to pull one over on me. Not that that would be, you know, the most difficult thing in the world, but, you know, congratulations. You know for sure that I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I would read it like 1,000 times over, to be perfectly honest, because it was so good. All right, and the last book that I read this month was one of my favorite books again, and it is Saga of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I don't know if you can see on my bookshelf, but I do have Circe by Madeline Miller, and I absolutely love that. Obviously, I love Greek mythology, and this story was focused on the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. It has been speculated over the years that their very close relationship was one of lovers. And so this is basically a story, a retelling that deep dives into that and basically makes the assumption that they were. And so I loved it. It was so good on many levels. I didn't really know what it was about. I thought it was just going to be about Achilles, like, you know, Circe was about Circe, but it's told from the perspective of Patroclus, him, his guy, his fella, his pal. And so I thought that was a really interesting and different way of being able to see Achilles from his eyes. And this book just like shook me at my core. And somehow she manages to fit so much into not a super long story. And I felt like I knew these boys. I felt like I knew them. Well, they were men by the end of it, but like I felt like I grew up with them. It's just something happens whenever I read her writing that it doesn't happen very often when I read people's writing. And something that came up in my head was just thinking about the way that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You know? Yeah. It was very, very interesting. I'm not going to get too into the story because I kind of gave you a little brief synopsis, but it was absolutely beautiful and I loved it. Right. So let's see. I think I have time to quickly go through my TBR for September, I have 12 books on here, so let me get through these as quickly as possible. I started reading Darker Shade of Magic at the end of August, and honestly, it's been a very slow read. Something a little bit lighter, so I started reading Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I've heard a lot of really good things about it, and I'm quite enjoying it. I am about like 20% in, and so far so good. It is exactly what I wanted to read right now, and I'm excited to see where it's gonna go. I also have Conjure Women on my list, which I believe is about like an African family, like line of women witches. I don't exactly know what it's about, but I heard that it was good, and I liked the cover of it, to be honest. And it just came available at my library, so I went ahead and put that on my list as well. And then also another book that is going to be available soon from my library, or two books that are going to be, well, actually three books that are going to be available soon from my library are The Cruel Prince, the second one is Six of Crows, and the third one is The Fifth Season. I've heard good things about all of these books, and I believe they're all series. And I'm kind of trying to start a new series. As you can probably tell, I believe Darker Shade of Magic is a series, and The Poppy War is a series as well. So I think I'm just trying to figure out which one I want to like read through right now. But yeah, I have those on there. I also have I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is actually going to be a movie on Netflix. I would like to read it before I watch the movie. This movie style is not in my typical genre, and I feel like part of the reason why I want to read it before is because I can read things like this. I can read things in the specific genre more so than I prefer watching them. So I think if I read it before I watch it, then it'll be a little bit easier for me to take in. So I have that on my list as well. I also have Women Who Run with the Wolves. I've had this on my bookshelf for a really long time. It's a really hefty book of like mythology of wild women, and I've read like a few stories from it, but I haven't read too much from it, and I would like to kind of start reading a few things here and there. And then I was inspired to read some classics from a couple YouTubers who read a lot of like Shakespeare and classic books, and it just inspired me to do so because, like I said, I tend to gravitate towards like YA contemporary, adult contemporary, YA fantasy, science fiction, stuff like that. Again, branching out, trying to get out of my comfort zone. And I used to actually read a lot of like historical fiction and a lot of classics. I remember absolutely loving, what is it called? Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. That was one of my favorite books. And yeah, like when I was younger, that was one of my favorite books. I also really like Jane Eyre. So I have A Midsummer Night's Dream. I have wanted to tackle Shakespeare for a while, but I've just been very intimidated. But I looked online to see what book would be good for like a beginner Shakespeare reader, and A Midsummer Night's Dream came up a few times, so I'm going to attempt it. I think I'm actually going to buy it just so that I can have it in my collection. I also have Anne of Green Gables because I feel like that's just going to feel really good to read. I have it on my bookshelf. I also have Anne of Avonlea on my bookshelf as well. A couple months ago, I finished the Anne with an E series on Netflix. Well, I say finished, but it was canceled, so I don't really want to talk about that. And then the last book is Howls Moving Castle. I was actually watching someone's video, and she was talking about kind of like books that you would like to read if you like cottagecore or like Studio Ghibli films. And I had no idea that Howl's Moving Castle was actually a book. So I put that on my list, and I also have it ordered from the library, so whenever it comes available, I'm going to read it. And I think it'll be really interesting to read. That's one of my favorite Studio Ghibli movies, so I'm excited to read the book. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys are ready for the new month. I know I am. This is gonna be a wonderful month. I can feel it. I can feel it in my bones. And I hope you guys are excited about the new video ideas that I have coming soon. I hope you guys are having a beautiful day and you're finding joy in whatever way it is that you can. And I will see you guys in my next video. I love you. Bye.